Scylla had stopped feeling the cold a long time ago. Her body, once trembling against the biting wind, had grown still. Not from peace, never peace, but from a strange numbness, the kind that crept in when pain became constant and the body stopped trying to fight it. Her skin, once a soft moss green, was now dusted with pale frost. Even her breath, shallow and slow, barely disturbed the freezing air. She didn't know how long she'd been up there, chained to the sacred altar stone, exposed to the merciless sky. Time didn't pass the same on the mountain. It dragged like a knife. Above her, the stars blinked with distant indifference, endless and cold. Once, as a child, she'd imagined gods lived among them, mighty, glowing beings who listened to prayers and watched over those deemed worthy. But now she knew better. Gods don't answer screams. Gods don't save daughters. Her wrists ached beneath the iron cuffs, crusted with dried blood. Her knees had long since buckled, leaving her to dangle from her bindings, back pressed to the jagged altar stone carved with symbols she no longer believed in. They left me here to die. My mother kissed my forehead and said it was an honor. My brother didn't look back. A gust of wind slammed into her like a wall, sharp enough to steal the breath from her lungs. It howled as it tore past her ears, carrying the faint scent of ozone and burning metal. And then the sky tore open. At first, she thought it was another hallucination, a flicker of hope birthed from starvation and cold. But the light wasn't in her mind. It was real. A streak of fire lit up the heavens, slicing across the dark like a divine blade. A ship, plummeting, fast, trailing smoke and glowing debris. It crashed somewhere beyond the ridgeline with a sound that split the night, a roar followed by an echoing shockwave that rattled the stones beneath her feet. Her heart jumped once in her chest, unsure if it was fear or something long buried sparking to life. She stared into the darkness for what felt like an eternity, the silence after the crash almost louder than the sound itself. Something was coming. She felt it. Not gods, not spirits. Something else. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Crunching through the icy path that snaked its way up the mountain. Not the rhythmic march of temple guards. Not the soft whisper of a priest's robe. These were deliberate. Measured. Wary. A figure emerged from the dark, outlined in the faint light of a dying flare behind him. Humanoid, but clearly not one of her kind. His skin was pale like snow. His clothing was strange, dark, worn armor streaked with soot, frost clinging to the edges. He carried a weapon slung across his back, something sleek and deadly, scarred by fire. But it wasn't the weapon she noticed. It was his eyes. Dark, focused, alive. He stopped a few steps away, his gaze fixed on her like she was something he didn't expect to find. His brow furrowed. Confusion. Concern? She stiffened as he stepped closer, the chains clinking softly behind her. Her body wanted to recoil, but there was nowhere to go. She was weak, too weak to fight or even flinch properly. He crouched before her. The look in his eyes changed, widened slightly as he took in the state she was in. Her cracked lips, bruised skin, and trembling shoulders. He said something in a low, firm voice. She didn't understand the words. They were soft, foreign, layered with sounds that didn't belong to her world. But the way he said them, it felt like a balm against her shredded nerves. Not a threat, not a priest's ritual chant, just a person speaking to another person. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Her throat was too dry, her voice lost to the wind days ago. Then he moved, slowly, like he didn't want to scare her. He pulled a small device from his belt. It lit up with a blue glow. A plasma cutter. Panic flashed through her. She pressed herself back against the stone, a weak, instinctive attempt to resist. He saw it paused, raised his hands, palm out. A universal gesture. I'm not here to hurt you. He leaned closer and aimed the cutter at the chain. The hiss of the plasma slicing through metal was sharp but brief. One cuff snapped open, then the other. Her arms dropped uselessly to her sides, too numb to move. Her legs gave out. She would have hit the stone if he hadn't caught her. His arms were strong, warm. He eased her down gently, wrapping something thick around her shoulders. His jacket. It was far too big, smelled like metal, sweat, and strange earth but it was warmth. She clung to it. For the first time in days, her body wasn't in agony, and that terrified her. She looked up at him through half-lidded eyes. His mouth moved again, another string of unintelligible words. But she could feel what he meant in the way his gaze lingered on her face, the way his hands adjusted the jacket carefully around her arms. He pulled something from a pouch, a bar of food, unfamiliar and compact. He broke it in half and offered her a piece. Her hand shook as she reached for it, her fingers brushing his as she took it. That touch, brief as it was, felt like something broke inside her. Not pain, not fear, something gentler, warmer. She looked into his face again, studying the lines of exhaustion and grit carved there. He looked human, mostly, but not from her world, not from any world she'd known. He stood slowly and scanned the horizon. His jaw tightened when he saw the distant glow of temple torches in the valley below. Trouble. He should leave. But he didn't. He looked back at her, this green-skinned, half-dead woman who should have been long forgotten. His expression changed. Something settled in him, like a choice had been made. He crouched beside her again and slid an arm beneath her knees. She tried to protest, her voice still silent, her body weak, but he didn't hesitate. He lifted her easily, his warmth enveloping her again. As he carried her into the shadows beyond the altar, away from the place she was meant to die, Sela leaned her head against his shoulder. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like an offering. She didn't feel like a burden or a shameful secret. She felt like someone worth saving. And somewhere deep inside, buried beneath the pain and betrayal, a thought stirred. Maybe I'm not ready to die after all. And as they vanished into the dark, away from gods and chains and the lies she was raised on, another thought followed, soft, almost too fragile to name. I want to live. Sela didn't remember falling asleep, but when she opened her eyes, everything hurt. Her skin stung where frostbite had started to bloom, and her muscles felt like they'd been torn apart and stitched back together with fire. The warmth pressed against her, unfamiliar but grounding. Fabric that wasn't hers, thicker than anything she'd ever worn. His jacket. She was lying beneath a jagged outcrop halfway down the mountainside, half buried in a hollow he'd carved into the snow with nothing but his hands and urgency. A shallow cave of rock and shadow, just enough to hide them from above. She shifted slightly, and pain bloomed up her spine. A sound escaped her lips, raw and hoarse. The man, her rescuer, turned instantly. He'd been sitting near the cave's edge, watching the horizon through a cracked lens embedded in his gauntlet. He looked over his shoulder when he heard her stir. Their eyes met again, and for a moment, nothing was said. But something passed between them. Recognition. Relief. He reached for a water flask, brought it close, and gently helped her sit up, his touch steady, surprisingly careful for someone built like a soldier. Here, he said. Sela didn't understand the word, but the intent was clear. She drank slowly, letting the water slide down her cracked throat like a blessing. It tasted of metal and ozone, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever had. When she finished, he offered a small strip of dried food. She hesitated, not out of fear but shame. Her hands trembled as she reached out, too weak to keep from shaking. He didn't mock her, didn't rush her, just waited. "Kale," he said suddenly, tapping his chest with a closed fist. She blinked at him. He repeated it. "Kale," then pointed to her. She stared at him, heart thudding slowly in her ribs, unsure if she wanted to give her name. But after everything, did she really have anything left to protect? "Sela," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. He nodded once, then turned his attention back to the outside world, his hand tightening slightly around the weapon on his hip. That's when she heard it, distant but unmistakable. Drums. Low, methodical, carried on the wind. Her blood turned cold. They were coming. The temple guards, or worse, scorched priests, cloaked in flame and metal, guided by their sacred tech. They'd seen the crash, seen the smoke. And if Sela was missing from the altar, there was only one place she could be. Kel didn't need to speak her language to know what those sounds meant. He moved quickly, securing his gear and scanning their surroundings for a route. Any route. down the mountain without exposing them. He crouched beside her and, with no ceremony, lifted her into his arms again. Her first instinct was resistance. She'd never been held like that before, never been carried. But his grip was strong, careful, protective without being possessive. And in her gut, she knew something vital. If he left her behind, she'd never survive the night. She didn't fight it. Cale moved with surprising speed for someone carrying another person. His breath came hard, but he didn't falter. Not when the path vanished into jagged drops. Not when the snow grew deeper, slowing every step. He adjusted his grip when her body slipped, always mindful not to jar her already battered frame. They moved through ravines slick with ice, past silent stone statues covered in moss and time, remnants of a civilization obsessed with gods who never answered. Sela clutched his jacket tighter, not just against the cold, but against the rising fear that if the priests caught them, it wouldn't end quickly. They'd make her a lesson. They'd make him an offering. At one point, Cale stopped beneath a leaning rock spire and knelt, setting her gently against the wall. His breath came fast, chest rising and falling beneath the cracked plates of his armor. He pulled out a small device and tapped at it, cursing softly when the screen glitched. A map, maybe, or a communicator. She couldn't tell. His frustration was obvious. He didn't like being blind out here. He looked at her again, like he was weighing something. Then he pointed toward the western ridgeline, where the mountain dipped into deep forest. It took her a second, but then she understood. Hide in the trees. Get out of sight. Stay low. She nodded weakly. He helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight. They moved again, this time with less urgency, but more purpose, weaving through the thinning snow toward the shelter of the woods. As they walked, something strange stirred in her chest. She should have been terrified of him, of being chased, of what might wait below. But with every step, Cale's presence beside her grounded her. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He watched the world like it might turn on them any second. And maybe it would. But still, she trusted him. That terrified her more than the hunters behind them. By the time they reached the edge of the tree line, night had fallen completely. No stars tonight, just thick clouds smothering the sky. Cale led her into a narrow crevice between two massive stone roots, half buried beneath the snow. There, he finally spoke again, his voice low, his expression unreadable. We stay here, just for the night. She didn't understand the words, but she caught the tone. Safe. For now. Sela curled against the cold rock, Cale's jacket still wrapped tight around her. She watched him as he crouched at the entrance, weapon in hand, eyes never still. He didn't belong to this world. He wasn't one of them. But in the span of a single day, he had done what no one else ever had. He came back for her. She didn't know what the next day would bring. She didn't know if they'd be found, if they'd survive. But as her eyes closed and sleep began to pull her under, a quiet certainty settled into her bones. She wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in her life, that meant something. She wasn't a sacrifice. She was something else now. And the mountain would remember. They traveled for days, navigating through cracked valleys and steaming fissures, guided only by Cale's instinct and Sela's fading memories of the land. The cold had given way to heat. Sharp winds turned to thick, sulfur-laced air. The mountains behind them disappeared into haze. Before them stretched a cursed land the locals called Raham's Teeth, a volcanic scar on the planet's surface, avoided by all but the desperate. It was perfect. They moved carefully through the ashen terrain, using ravines and collapsed lava tubes for cover. No more chasing. No more whispers in the dark. Just the breathless quiet of old gods buried in soot. Cale didn't speak often, and Sela didn't press. Silence had a different meaning now, one that felt less like fear and more like peace. On the fourth night, they found the observatory. It rose out of the charred ground like a skeleton, tilted, weathered, half swallowed by black stone. Massive gears jutted from the crumbling dome, and ancient lenses lay cracked across the floor. Cale approached it cautiously, rifle at the ready, but no movement stirred within. Whatever had lived here, worshipped here, watched the skies here, it was long gone. Inside, The structure held surprisingly well. The air was dry, warm, and heavy with old dust. Kale cleared a corner of debris while Sela inspected the carved walls. Constellations marked with symbols she didn't recognize. The gods her people feared had once lived in places like this. Places built not to pray, but to observe. The stars were never gods, she said, half to herself. Kale glanced up. No, just light, waiting to be understood. Sela turned toward him. She didn't always understand his words. Not perfectly, but she was learning to feel them. Later, as night fell and the ground outside cooled, they sat together near the broken dome. Above them, the sky stretched wide and clear. For the first time in years, there were no drums, no chants, no temple smoke. Just the stars, endless and silent. Sela was the first to speak. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked, her voice low. Kale didn't answer immediately. He leaned back against the wall, watching the dim light flicker from his dying wrist lamp. The silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. "I've seen people chained before," he said finally. "I was ordered not to stop, but I didn't listen then either." Sela studied his face in the dim light. She could see the weight he carried, something behind his eyes that hadn't healed. "You lost someone." Kale nodded. "More than one." She didn't press. The air between them was already heavy with things neither could yet say. Sela pulled her knees to her chest and exhaled slowly. "They told me I was chosen, that I'd bring rain to the dry season, warmth to the cold fields, that my death would feed the sky. Do you still believe that?" She shook her head. "No, but I believed it then. I let them bind me. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet long enough, the gods would speak." Kale's gaze didn't waver. "Did they?" Sela looked up, meeting his eyes. "No, but you did." The words settled between them like coals. Kale's hand, resting near his side, shifted slightly. Not a gesture, just an echo of thought. Sela moved first. She reached across the space between them, not with hesitation, but certainty. Her fingers brushed his cheek, and her touch was soft, steady. Kale didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned into it, his hand rising to rest gently against hers. There was no ceremony in the kiss that followed. No music, no stars falling. It was quiet, simple, human. Their lips met in a slow, searching motion, awkward and tender, born not from longing, but from understanding. A bridge between two people who had nothing left and still chose each other anyway. When they parted, Sela stayed close, her forehead against his, her breath warm in the dry air. "I never wanted to be a voice for the gods," she whispered. "But maybe I can speak for something else now." Kale didn't reply. He didn't need to. His thumb traced a gentle path across the back of her hand, and the look in his eyes said enough. Outside, the world burned quietly in the distance. But inside, for the first time, they had found something untouched by fire. Not salvation, not destiny, just each other. And for now, that was enough. The flames were ceremonial. That was how they masked it, bright and holy, rising from the eastern ridge like a second dawn, beautiful from a distance, terrifying up close. But Sela knew what they meant. They weren't prayers. They were warnings. Kale had spotted the fire an hour before she did, using the last functional scan in his wrist lens. They'd already packed their supplies, ready to move again. He didn't say much when he showed her the glow creeping over the hill. He didn't need to. The heat in her chest spoke louder than any words could. "They found a trail," she murmured, barely audible. Kale adjusted the strap on his rifle, voice even. "They're flushing us out. Standard perimeter drive. Whoever's leading them knows what they're doing. They think they're following a curse," she said bitterly. "But they're only chasing what they fear the most, someone who left the altar and didn't die." They watched the smoke rising together, silent. The observatory behind them, where they'd shared something fragile and real just one night before, was already shrinking in the haze. And though Sela had feared the moment she'd have to turn back, now that it had come, she didn't flinch. "I want to go back," she said, eyes fixed on the fire. Kale turned to her. "To what?" "To where they chained me," she answered. "To where I died. Just not the way they hoped." Kale's brow creased slightly. He studied her face, the fire in her eyes, not wild but precise. measured. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. He just said, "Then we go together." The path to the lower tier of the temple grounds was a secret Sela had kept since she was 12. A back route used by temple attendants, forgotten under rubble and overgrowth. They moved quickly, cloaked in dusk and heat, the thick roots and ash muting their steps. They emerged inside what had once been the preparation hall, a chamber soaked in quiet dread. Stone bowls still sat along the walls, filled with dust and old bones. The walls were painted with stories, gods descending in fire, chosen souls rising in smoke. Sela had once thought them beautiful. Now, she only saw lies. "This is where they anoint the blessed," she said quietly. "They bind your arms, wash your feet, sing prayers while you bleed." Kale scanned the room but didn't speak. He was listening to her now, the way no one in her life ever had. She approached the central stone platform, touched it with her fingertips. It was colder than she remembered. Smaller, too. "They teach you not to scream," she said, voice low. "Screaming makes the gods turn away. But silence is holy." Kale stepped beside her, watching the set of her jaw. "You're not silent anymore," he said. "No," she replied. "Not anymore." They heard the footsteps before they saw him. Quick, desperate, echoing down the old stone corridor. Kale raised his weapon, but Sela lifted a hand. "I know that rhythm." A moment later, her brother appeared. Towering. His robes were singed at the hem, and sweat clung to his brow. He stopped when he saw her, alive, standing tall, not broken or burned. And then his gaze shifted to Kale. "Is this what took you?" he spat. "No," Sela said flatly. "This is who saved me." Talrin's face twisted, something between disbelief and fear. "You were chosen. You accepted it. You brought this on all of us. Fire, famine, sickness. You broke the cycle." Sela stepped forward. "No, I broke the chains." "That's not the same." He looked at her like he didn't recognize her anymore. Maybe he didn't. "Come back," he said. "There's still time. One more ritual, one more offering. The gods might forgive." She laughed, short, sharp. "The gods? The same ones that stood by while you watched me freeze to death on a mountain. We did what we had to, what we were taught." Sela's voice dropped. "Then maybe it's time someone unlearned it." Kale hadn't moved, but his finger hovered just near the trigger. Not a threat, a warning. Towrin looked between them. "You'll doom this place." "No," Kale said. "She's the one who'll free it." Towrin turned and ran. Sela didn't stop him. Some chains break by fire, others by letting go. By the time they reached the altar square, the ceremony had begun. Smoke choked the sky. Priests in ash-dyed robes circled the central flame, chanting, waving blades and staffs, their voices rhythmic and hollow. The altar stone loomed behind them, painted with fresh blood and powdered gold. Around them, villagers had gathered, silent, expectant, waiting for divine justice. And then Sela stepped out of the shadows. The chants stuttered. Faces turned. A wave of gasps rippled through the square. She walked straight toward the altar, head high, unarmed. Beside her, Kale moved like a phantom, quiet but lethal, every movement coiled with purpose. One of the priests shouted, breaking the silence. "She walks in defiance. She walks with the enemy." "No," Sela said, her voice carrying across the square. "I walk in truth. And this," she pointed to the altar, "is your God." The crowd murmured. Some looked away. Some stared, stunned. "This stone has devoured our daughters and sons. It has silenced voices, crushed prayers, but has never once answered." Kale stood ready. His eyes tracked every priest, every flick of a blade. The high priest raised his hand to strike. Kale moved faster. The weapon fired once, clean, silent, surgical. The priest collapsed mid-sentence, his staff clattering against the stone. Screams erupted. Chaos broke loose. But Sela didn't move. She turned to the altar, pulled a vial from Kale's pack, and poured the liquid over the base. Ancient oil, thick and volatile. She struck flint against steel, and flame bloomed from stone. The altar burned. The fire roared with a hunger that felt divine. Sela didn't flinch, and when Kale touched her shoulder, she nodded. They vanished into the smoke before the crowd could decide whether to worship or hate them. They walked in silence for a long time. Only when the glow of the temple faded behind the ridge did Sela finally speak. "I thought I'd be afraid," she said. "But you weren't," Kale replied. She shook her head. "Not of them. Not anymore. What scares me now is what I'll do with the freedom I asked for." Kale reached for her hand, his grip steady and warm. "Then let's figure out," he said, "together." And as they disappeared into the wild, the only light behind them came from fire. But ahead, there was something brighter waiting. They walked for 3 days without stopping long enough to remember what it felt like to rest. The temple was behind them now, left in smoke and shouts and fire. But in Sela's mind, its shadow still loomed like a mountain never meant to be climbed. It had been built not just from stone, but from memory, from ritual, from lies passed down so many times they'd become truths, etched into the bones of her people like scripture. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Kale never asked if she was okay. He didn't offer words she wouldn't believe. He simply walked beside her, steady, silent, real. She had come to find comfort in that. The way he never filled the silence unless it needed breaking. His presence alone was enough. By the 4th morning, the land began to change. Gone were the volcanic scars and cracked ash plains. Here, the earth softened beneath their feet. The wind carried the scent of moisture. The sun rose through a pale mist, touching the treetops with light. They had reached the green beyond, a place so distant and untouched that most didn't believe it existed. Sela had heard stories as a child, a land where no temple stood, where gods had no claim, and the sky never demanded blood. She never thought she'd see it, and now that she had, she didn't know what to do with it. Kale stopped by a small stream and knelt to collect water. Sela sat on a moss-covered rock nearby, eyes scanning the trees like they might vanish if she blinked. "Where are we?" she asked. Kale looked up, wiping his hands on his pants. "Safe." She tilted her head. "No name. Not when your people gave it," he replied. "That usually helps." Sela smiled faintly at that. As the wind rustled through the leaves, she let out a slow breath and asked the question that had been pressing at her ribs since the moment they left the flames behind. "Do you want to know why they chose me?" Kale didn't move. He didn't urge her to go on. That was why she did. "I was born under the red moon," she began. Her voice was soft but steady. "It only appears once every 30 cycles. They call it the Veil's Eye. When a child is born beneath it, the elders say they're marked, chosen by the gods for something greater." She plucked a small leaf from the moss and turned it between her fingers. "My mother said it was a blessing, that I was sacred, that the gods had touched me with purpose." She paused. "But sacred doesn't mean protected. It means watched, measured, promised." Kale sat down across from her, quiet, letting her speak. "I spent my life preparing for the role they'd already written for me. I was trained in hymns, rituals, taught to move like a symbol instead of a person. I was told the gods would take me when I was ready." She glanced up at him. "They took me when I was 17. Kale's expression didn't change, but his eyes, always calm and calculating, now looked carved from stone. Sela's voice dipped lower. "My brother was the one who led me up the mountain. He didn't cry. He didn't hesitate. He just carried the chain like it was an offering, not an execution. And I didn't scream." She swallowed hard. "I wanted to, but I thought if I stayed silent long enough, the gods might actually answer." Kale leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "And did they?" Sela looked down at the stream. "No, but you did." They didn't speak for a while. The sounds of water and wind filled the silence. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, a sound that didn't exist in the highlands in the temple lands or in the caves below the mountain. It sounded alive. "Free. I don't know how to be anything else," she admitted. "I don't know who I am without them." Kale studied her. "You are whoever you decide to be now." Sela looked at him, green eyes meeting his. And for the first time since they'd met, she didn't see a rescuer. She saw someone just as lost. "Why are you here?" she asked quietly. "Really? Why this planet? Why me?" Kale didn't answer immediately. He looked past her into the trees, and when he spoke, his voice held a weight she hadn't heard before. "I was sent on a recon mission. Routine. He gave a dry laugh. But nothing about this place is routine. My ship was struck by a defense system I didn't even know existed. I crashed, lost contact. Then I found you. He looked back at her. I was supposed to report back. Get extracted. Return with data. Instead, I stayed. Why? Because one day I saw something that shouldn't exist. A woman chained to a stone, still alive. And I realized some things are more important than orders. Sela's throat tightened. You gave up your mission for me. I gave up the wrong mission, he said. I found a better one. That night, they built a shelter near the stream. Nothing more than branches, leaves, and Kale's thermal sheet stretched between two trees. The stars peeked through the canopy above, and the air was warm enough to feel safe. Sela lay beside Kale on the moss, her head on his shoulder. His arm was draped over her side, protective but gentle. You could still call for them, she murmured. Your people. You still have the transmitter. I don't want to, he said simply. She looked up at him. What if you never get home? He turned his head to her, gaze unflinching. Maybe this is home now. The words hit her like a soft impact, quiet but deep. She sat up slightly, fingers trailing across his chest, tracing the lines of an old scar. Everything I knew was taken from me, she said. But I don't feel empty. Not anymore. He brought his hand to her cheek, brushing her hair behind her ear. I don't want to save you, he said. I just want to be with you, however that looks. They kissed then, not like the first time, when fear and gratitude mixed with fragile longing. This kiss was fuller. Sure, built from what they had seen of each other. Weakness, rage, fear, tenderness, and still chosen. When they broke apart, breathless but calm, Sela pressed her forehead to his. No gods, no chains, no titles. He nodded. Just us. And for the first time in her life, she felt whole. The shelter they pieced together was modest. Woven branches and repurposed ship panels. Kale's thermal cover repurposed as roofing. The work was slow, full of learning, of mistakes and laughter. Kale wasn't much of a builder, but he was patient. Sela had never planted a seed, but she had strong hands and sharper instincts than she realized. Here, she wasn't a symbol. She wasn't an offering. She was a woman. And Kale, he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He became something else. A constant. A partner. A man with dirt under his nails and quiet thoughts behind his steady eyes. She watched him now as he crouched by the stream, coaxing stubborn roots out of the soil. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, revealing faded scars. Not battle wounds. Maintenance burns, old engine marks, reminders of the life he'd once lived in the sky. Sela smiled. She didn't think she'd ever stop watching him. But that day, the forest changed. The birds went silent. The breeze shifted. Sela felt it before she saw anything. A stillness in the trees. A wrongness in the air. Kale noticed too. He stood slowly, scanning the tree line with the silent precision of someone who had survived worse things than monsters in the dark. His hand moved to the weapon strapped at his hip, unloaded for days until now. Then the figure stepped from the woods. He wore a loose robe the color of dried earth. His face was younger than expected, but his posture was rigid, rehearsed. Markings crossed his forehead, symbols Sela recognized instantly. A watcher, one of the temple's silent enforcers. The ones who never spoke unless the gods demanded it. The ones who never stopped tracking what they believed belonged to them. Kale didn't raise his weapon, but he didn't lower his guard. The watcher stared straight at Sela. You were chosen, he said calmly. You were not meant to leave. Kale stepped between them without hesitation. She left. She survived. You're done here. But the watcher wasn't looking at him. She carries the weight of the veil, he said. Your interference will not unbind it. I don't believe in your veil, Kale replied. And neither does she. The watcher slowly reached into his robe. Kale's hand tightened. But instead of a weapon, the man pulled out a small, glowing device, rough, ancient, patched with crude temple tech. A signal beacon, not powerful, but enough to send a call through the outer atmosphere. Enough to bring more. Sela stepped forward then. Not afraid. Not anymore. You came all this way for me, she asked. After all this time? You broke the order, he said. We restore what has been unbalanced. Sela looked at the beacon. I didn't break it, she said. I walked away from it. She looked at Kale, then back at the Watcher. And I'm not going back. Kale raised his weapon, just slightly. The forest held its breath. You have one chance, he told the man. Drop it. Leave. You come back again, I won't ask nicely. The Watcher looked between them. Two people standing not as fugitives, but as equals. A woman who had once been chained. A man who had once followed orders. Now neither of them bowed to anything. The Watcher lowered the beacon. He set it down on the moss-covered ground, then turned and disappeared into the trees without a word. Kale stepped forward, picked up the device, and smashed it under his boot. The silence that followed was not empty. It was earned. That night, as the fire cracked softly beside them, Kale sat on the edge of their shelter, staring into the woods. Sela came to him quietly, sitting beside him in the glow. He was right, she said. Kale glanced at her. I was chosen, she said, but not by the gods. By fear, by tradition, by silence. She leaned her head against his shoulder. But I choose now. I choose this. Kale wrapped an arm around her, drawing her closer. You still want to stay? He asked. I want to build, she whispered. With you. The firelight flickered in her eyes. No priest, no watcher, no altar would take her from this. And in that moment, surrounded by soil and sky and the rhythm of breath beside breath, they both understood something simple and irreversible. Their past had tried to define them, but they had chosen each other, and the rest they would write together. It had been 37 days since the temple burned. The world had not ended. The sun still rose. The rivers still flowed. Rain had come early this season, soft and warm, painting the forest in a deeper shade of green than Sela had ever seen. No storms, no fire from the sky, no gods descending in wrath. Nothing, just peace. Sela stood at the edge of the small clearing she and Kale now called home. Their shelter had taken shape slowly, not from desperation, but from care. Stone and wood, vines and scavenged ship plating. Humble, sturdy, and theirs. Kale had built the frame. She had woven the rest. Together, they'd carved a space into the wild where no chains could reach. The wind shifted, and she closed her eyes, letting it move through her hair. Her skin was still marked from the past, scars on her wrists, the faint burn of old bruises. But now, they felt like reminders, not burdens. Proof she'd survived. Proof she'd chosen to. Kale was down by the stream, bent over a patch of soil he'd been trying to tame. Farming, he called it. The word was foreign, funny on his tongue. His hands were dirty, strong, human. Sela watched him, warmth blooming in her chest like a second sun. When he noticed her, he smiled, not the guarded, half-measure expression he'd worn in the early days, but something real, something open. You're staring, he said, brushing a smear of earth from his cheek. I still don't believe you're real sometimes, she replied. He stood and wiped his palms on his trousers, walking toward her. Well, I've definitely got the back pain to prove otherwise. She laughed, a full, easy sound. He reached her, and she leaned into his touch as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. We're going to need to start thinking about more permanent walls, he said. Something that won't collapse when it rains. And a roof that doesn't leak, she added. I never claimed to be a builder. No, she said, slipping her arms around his waist. You're something better. He looked down at her. Oh yeah? What's that? A man who gave me a future. They stood like that for a long moment, pressed together beneath a sky that no longer demanded offerings. There were no weapons in their hands, no footsteps in the distance, no fear, only breath and heat and stillness. Later, as twilight fell, they sat side by side near the fire pit, eating roasted root and wild herbs Kale still insisted tasted like soap. The stars emerged slowly above them, familiar and unfamiliar, tiny reminders of how vast the galaxy remained, and how small their corner of it had become. Sela tilted her head back, gazing upward. Do you think they'll ever come looking for you? She asked. Kale's hands stilled over the plate in his lap. They might, he said, but if they do, they'll find the beacon's gone. I destroyed it. She turned toward him, surprised. When? He gave her a quiet look. The night after the temple. I hiked back, took what I could salvage. Then I shut it off for good. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want it to feel like a choice you owed me. He paused. But I want you to know, I'm not leaving. This is where I stay. Sela's throat tightened. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers with his. You stayed when I was nothing but a ruin, she said. Now you get to see what I become. He leaned forward and kissed her, slow, sure, without urgency. Not a claim, but a vow. When they parted, she looked down at their joined hands, then up at the stars again. My people will tell stories, she murmured. They'll say I vanished, that I was taken by a god or punished for defying the altar. Kale tilted his head. And what will you say? I'll say they were right, just not in the way they think. She smiled. I was taken, not by a god, but by a man who taught me how to live. He looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable at first, then breaking into something tender. You taught me too, he said. You reminded me who I was before I wore a uniform. And who's that? Someone who can still believe in something worth building. The fire crackled between them. Insects buzzed softly through the trees. The stars wheeled above, patient and endless. Sela leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. I never thought I'd be the one to tell a story like this, she whispered. Kale rested his cheek against her hair. Then let's write the rest of it ourselves. And they did. They planted seeds in the softened soil. They gathered stone for walls. They built a life from ruin, not in defiance of the past, but in acceptance of it, no longer trapped by it. The gods of fire and silence were gone now. The chains had been broken. The altar was ash, and Sela, once a girl sacrificed to fear, now stood unshaken in the wild. She had found her voice. She had found her future, and she had found it with him. The wind in the clearing no longer whispered warnings. It carried only the scent of pine sap and damp earth, the occasional rustle of leaves, and birdsong that rose and fell with the sun. In this part of the world, the air felt thicker, richer somehow. Every breath Sela took felt earned. She knelt beside the small garden patch, dirt caked beneath her fingernails, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth as she traced a finger over the first true sprout of wild grain they'd managed to cultivate. It wasn't much, just 4 fragile green stalks reaching toward the sky. But it was more than she'd ever had before. Behind her, the steady rhythm of Kale's hammer tapping stone echoed through the trees. He was working on a low wall, part of a project to build a permanent shelter with the salvaged plasteel from his broken pod and stones they'd hauled by hand from the streambed. His shirt was tied around his waist, and his back glistened with sweat, muscles moving with focus and ease. They had stopped running. They had stopped surviving. Now they were living. Sela stood, brushing her hands on her thighs. The sun was warm on her face, golden through the trees. She took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, stretch her ribs. This was hers. No chains, no eyes watching from temples, no voices telling her who to be. Kale looked up as she approached, setting his hammer aside. Did I hear a triumphant grunt from the garden? She grinned. They're growing. All 4. She nodded. He wiped sweat from his brow. Well, that's one more than last week. Soon we'll have a full harvest. Maybe a feast. A very tiny feast, she said. For one mouse. They laughed, the sound echoing clean and bright through the clearing. As evening set in and the shadows grew longer, they sat by the fire pit they'd dug together. The stones were warm beneath them. Sela rested her head on Kale's shoulder, and he absently traced circles along her arm with the pad of his thumb. It was in that quiet that he asked, Do you ever think about them? He didn't have to explain who. She was silent for a while. The fire crackled softly between them. The smell of herbs roasting in their little clay pot filled the air. Sometimes, she said finally, in dreams, in pieces. Kale waited. My mother sang when they took me. She stood at the altar with tears in her eyes, but they weren't for me. They were for the ritual, for the pride, for what I meant to the village. Sela's voice was steady, but distant, like remembering someone else's story. My brother, Taurin, didn't hesitate. He carried the chains like they were sacred. Kale's jaw tensed. He didn't even look back. No, Sela said. He didn't. She looked into the flames. After the altar burned, I thought maybe I'd see them again. That they'd come after me, to finish it, or to ask why. She paused, but they didn't. Kale's eyes met hers, calm and listening. The village scattered, she continued. The priests lost their voice. The ritual stopped, and my family just vanished with the smoke. She took a breath that didn't tremble. Does it hurt? Kale asked quietly. Sela considered the question. Not like it used to. It's a quiet ache now, like when your hands remember carrying something heavy long after you've set it down. Kale didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Sela turned toward him, her gaze steady. They chose belief over me, and I chose life over them. She rested her head on his chest. He wrapped an arm around her, pulled her close. The stars were beginning to blink into the sky above them. You were the beginning of something, he said softly. No, she whispered. We are. The next morning, Sela walked alone to the edge of the woods, holding something wrapped in cloth. She knelt by the base of a tree and unwrapped it gently, a single rusted chain link. The last one. She had kept it longer than she meant to, partly out of habit, partly because it had once defined her. She dug a small hole in the soil and placed it inside, then covered it with earth and pressed it flat with both hands. I'm not your vessel, she said softly. I was never your offering. She stood and didn't look back. Days turned to weeks. The shelter became a home. The garden expanded. Kale repaired the small energy cell enough to store light for cold nights. Sela learned how to weave moss fiber into cloth. They built, slept, laughed. They kissed beneath the rain and swam when the river ran high. No one came. Not another watcher. Not a priest. Not even an echo of the gods. One evening, as twilight settled over their little world, Kale stood by the field, watching the sun dip low. Sela came to his side, wiping her hands on her tunic after setting traps near the edge of the woods. Do you still think it might come? She asked. Kale thought for a moment. No, he said. There's nothing left for them to come from. Sela exhaled slowly. I keep expecting it. A sign, a sound, but it's quiet. That's what peace sounds like, Kale replied. She slipped her hand into his. It doesn't feel like an ending. It's not, he said. It's a beginning. They stood like that for a long time, watching the sun disappear behind the hills. And when night came, they went inside, together, whole, unchained. No more altars. No more gods. No more voices telling them who to be. Only two people, planting a future, writing their own myth. And for the first time in either of their lives, it would be theirs